Hello and welcome back to HEMAFightBreakdowns. Today I want to talk about Ochs, or at least Ochs-like positions. Ochs is a guard that exists in pretty much any Germanic manual and has direct crossovers to most Italian manuals that I've ever seen. So it stands to reason that it's the guard that we should see a lot. And yet, in competitive HEMA, we pretty much see it never. And there's a few reasons for that. It is a biomechanically very complicated position. It feels weak to most people upon just trying it for the first time. It is weak for a lot of objective reasons, and I think most importantly at all, it doesn't guard a whole lot. But regardless, there are still a lot of things that you can do from Ochs and should try to do from Ochs. And I think if a lot of more people realize what the benefits and negatives are of Ochs, they would have more reason to try it out. So what we're going to watch here is an exchange where Ochs works, and it works for a very particular reason. The first reason it works is that it's a bit of a bait guard. So when you see someone walk at you like this, which I know this isn't technically an Ochs, but I'm just going to call it one for the sake of the idea that it basically starts from the exact same position and guards the exact same places. And that is when someone else comes at you with this particular guard, there are two obvious things that you see. The first is that their point is towards you, which means that they can naturally stab from there. And two, that their left side on your right side is exposed. And the first thing that 9 out of 10 people do when someone walks at you in this guard is immediately throw an attack of some kind onto that side. Now, in this particular case, that person doesn't do that. What they instead do is they go for one of the other openings, which actually I believe is in a manual. Is if someone is standing in Ochs, you throw a Geistling at their leg. And I've done this a whole lot of times because one thing that you can say about Ochs is that it's a bit of a short range guard and there are not a whole lot of obvious quick attacks that you can throw out of it. But this is one of them. So if you watch this person on the right here, the second they see this attack coming, they clear this headspace. They clear this left side of their body because, again, 9 times out of 10, that's the one place people are going to attack. So if you always clear there first, you're probably walking into a good situation. Only this time they go low. There's not really anything they can hit. And more importantly, you notice this. They start reaching towards this low line, but upon seeing this sword coming at them from over the top, they immediately panic and try to parry. They pretty much give up on whatever it was they were trying to do in order to attack, and they go back to parrying, specifically because the very wide sweeping motion of this attack, which starts about here, is intimidating. It gets other people to change what they're doing because they know no matter what they do down here, they're going to get hit in the head. So your brain naturally tells you, I don't want to get hit in the head. I want to parry instead. And what you do is you force yourself into a bad situation where you were going for something that was unprotected. And now you have to try to block out of it. And it's a lose-lose. So that instance worked pretty well. The next sort of interaction that I want to pay attention to is another one that Ochs has an advantage of, I think, over long point. And that is it presents the tip forward while having the hands back. If you think about a plow or a long point position that people typically take in order to present their tip forward, one of the disadvantages it has is that it naturally presents your blade so far forward in front of you that it can be engaged by your opponent. Now, there are things that people do to try to mitigate this. A lot of people will go out into their plow, but then point their tip down towards the ground in order to basically take away the ability for the person to engage with their sword, but at the disadvantage of now they have to point their tip, toward the floor. They can't really threaten their opponent as well. One thing about this particular Ochs position that is interesting is that not only are the hands pulled back, not only is the tip more or less towards the opponent, but you can still do these exact same things where you dip your tip a little bit. But unlike dipping your tip with a plow, it's still going towards the ground, but it's also far more in the direction of your opponent. The amount that you have to adjust or to get your tip back online is a matter of a few inches, whereas if you're pointing your plow down towards the ground, it's the matter of a few feet. So what we're going to see in this interaction is basically a little bit of analysis paralysis, where right upon this person transitioning into the opposite Ochs, this person basically sees the guard, is immediately threatened by the point forward nature that's happening here, does everything they can to stop themselves, and then as a result simply opens themselves up to a cut that comes straight through. And the reason this works out is because of this position right here. As they're coming forward and they see this point right in their face, they realize two things. If they throw the cut from the position that they're in, they're going to be locked out of line. All this person has to do is extend their ox forward into a full-on thrust, which is a very simple, very direct, and very straightforward motion. They probably wouldn't even have to use their feet. And this would get locked out by the crossguard, and they just get stabbed in the face. And from this position, there's not a lot you can do other than throw that cut. You can't crump meaningfully because, again, their blade is not down here by their hip. So there's no over-the-top motion that can be easily done without artificially raising your own sword high up and then trying to crump an ox. Crumping an ox is actually kind of hard to do, especially well if the other person is not, all the way extended. And more importantly, if they try to Zorn this blade, because it's also not low, crossing the body line means that there's a good chance their weak of their sword is going to cross right into the mid of the other person's blade, which means that even if they were stabbing, there's a decent chance that you wouldn't be able to meaningfully displace it. And even if you did, you would have to commit significantly more energy to doing so than you would likely get out of it. This person could still just Dirge Vexel their tip, duck out of the way of that Zorn, and stab them in the face regardless. So what I'm really advocating here for is that if you're the kind of person like me who loves tip forward management in order to maintain distance and basically keep an ever-present threat against your opponent from charging in on you, Ochs may in many cases be a much better option. But there are still drawbacks to Ochs that I think people are well aware of. Specifically, in this example, we're going to see one of the main drawbacks of Ochs, and that is whenever you pull back your hands, you basically remove them from being behind your crossguard and you open them up as targets. So in this particular instance, Ochs is still being used as it was before, trying the same sort of things we've seen. But right there, the second the person on the left realizes that that cut is going to be thrown from that Ochs again, as this clearing strike happens across the left side of the body, which again is really there to prevent this instantaneous reaction-based overhow to the right side, their left side, which would be cleared, they wait for a second, and right here on this transition period, where normally they would be coming all the way back around to throw some other attack, they snipe them in the hands. And the reason this works is both when you're standing in Ochs, when, it's a bait, because as I said before, one of the things that Ochs is good at is trying to trick people into attacking the side that this clearing strike normally takes care of. Regardless of whether or not this clearing strike works, the entire time you're performing any motion out of Ochs, your hands are always going to be exposed, and that's for two reasons. One, an Ochs position brings your hands naturally higher, which means that anything you throw out of them, you have to basically move your hands back down and put them back behind the crossguard in order to be safe from hand snipes. Since pretty much everything you're going to be trying to do from Ochs does not involve lowering your hands, it involves keeping your hands up there to keep that efficient line from the shoulder, your hands are always going to be at risk. Now, one of the only things that you can unfortunately do in this situation, in one case, is to just sort of accept the fact that hand hits might happen and make sure that you're delivering something better in response. So, for example, if you're sitting up in Ochs and you don't think that, or you think that someone's just going to try to engage with your blade rather than throw something over here, you can forego the clearing strike and just stab right over the top, like the Bacorno, like we've seen in other videos. Because, again, your hands are high and your blade's pointed a little bit low, you can dip your tip up, or not dip, raise your tip up, and then dip it down over the top of your opponent's hands in order to stab them in the chest, knowing that their attempts to clear it will be difficult, but the entire time you're doing that, you could be sniped in the hands. You simply have to accept the fact that if you were the one approaching, you were the one attacking, you throwing that stab, you have to accept sometimes that if somebody just doesn't want to live, they are going to be able to tag you in response. And you have to accept sometimes that you're going to get hit in the hands when in guards that don't protect your hands, as long as you are making sure that you're delivering a superior blow at the same time. The other thing that you can do, again, besides this clearing strike, which again is a very good idea, is to transition out of this blow into a more normal plow. I guess I shouldn't say normal, but you know what I mean. The idea here is that whenever you use the bait aspect of an ox to get someone to engage on your terms, one thing that can always throw them off is to then transition into that other guard midway, basically throwing off what they think is going to happen and what sections of their body they've kept safe. So for example, let's just pretend that this hand shot did not land and it just maybe parried or missed. At this point, this attack is coming down over the top, and even if it didn't land, we're in now a far more normal position that I think a lot of people who fence KDF are in. The difference being that because of the situation that happened, you've put yourself in a position where your opponent no longer knows what guard you're fencing out of, and they no longer know what things to expect from you. People know to expect a stab from Ochs, even if they don't use it themselves, even if they don't fence against people who use it. Everyone knows that the stab is the thing that comes from Ochs. What people don't expect is this clearing strike and Oberhau from the side. But if you've already done it a few times, there's a good chance even now your opponent will expect it. So if you're having trouble getting these Ochs plays to land, what I'll tell you to do is put it in your fencing, start in it, train out of it, but never be afraid if it starts failing to just go into Ochs, threaten something, and then leave it immediately and then attack to try to throw off your opponent. Because as I said in other videos, one of the best tools you can have for defeating a fencer who might be figuring out what you're doing is to just change your fencing to something that you're also familiar with so that they can never get that pattern too firmly lodged in their head. No matter how good your Ochs to clearing strike to Oberhau might be, if you throw it 4 times in a row, anybody is going to get used to that. If you can manipulate that and make sure that they're getting used to it actually puts them into a bad pattern, then you're going to find a lot more success with both halves of the fencing that you're doing. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your own footage featured on the channel, feel free to send me an email over at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.